Why do bad things happen to good people? Look, the time in which we're in right now, some of us have suffered greatly. I know people who've lost family members due to COVID-19. This is in addition to general traumas, losses, deaths, and other experiences, disappointing experiences in our lives. It's just somewhat amplified now in certain ways. We're dealing with a lot of uncertainty, and I hope that our suffering or pain that any of us are experiencing, are at the minimum. But it's still part of life. To envision life without any form of pain or any suffering, without setbacks, without loss, without trauma is not just very difficult, it's impossible. So much about life has the light and dark side to it, the light and the shadow. And it's really, in many ways, that real testimony to your spirit, to our spirit, the human spirit of resilience, is how we deal with situations that are not easy. When things are going well, we don't need to necessarily find deeper resources. And we often take for granted those gifts. But when things don't go well, when there's a loss, and there's something painful in our lives, something that we did not want or expect. And I'm talking about the broad spectrum of pain and suffering. This can include, like I mentioned, a death, a loss, God forbid. It can include a trauma. It can include a broken relationship. It can include betrayal, violation. You name it. Fill in the blanks. It's just not practical to go through every possible scenario, but everyone has gone through moments of pain and suffering. And we ask those big questions. Why me? Why did it have to happen? Why couldn't it have happened another way? And all the explanations people give you, you'll grow through it. I've been there. Transcend. There's a deeper reason. These may all be true, but the bottom line, the best way I would put it is, a brilliant mind cannot speak to a bleeding heart. When you see someone suffering, and I don't even want to invoke any particular case, just let's talk theoretically. A mother has lost a child, God forbid. Someone had an accident. A young person died far too early in their lives, if there's such a thing. It's always too early, perhaps. A child is born handicapped. You name it. I'll go down the list. There's so many different things. Someone comes and starts explaining to you, there's a deeper reason for it, and let me explain it to you. Not only are you unable to hear it, it's so inappropriate. It's offensive. It's offensive. Why? Because you're not appreciating the most important thing of all. My heart is bleeding. I'm hurt. I feel lost. I feel demoralized. I feel weak. I'm not interested now in someone pontificating philosophically about things. That is often lacking the empathy of just recognizing that someone is hurt and saying, I know you're hurt. Let me hold your hand. I want to be there with you. That goes a longer way, far longer way than any type of real words. That is why you find that the people who truly have the true people, I would say, that dealt with suffering, you know what their response is usually? Silence. Silence. Why silence? Because no words can actually contain or capture the gravity, the intensity of the emotions involved. And humility is expressed through silence. It's a humble moment, a sacred moment. And interestingly, just recognizing that empathetic feeling for another, it itself is healing. You may not see it right away, but that itself is healing. You know why? Because it's real. It's a real reaction. It's not fabricated. It's not coming from some type of conceived, some type of fabric. It's not some type of preconceived ideas. It's not based on books. It's just recognizing the fragility of the human condition, of a human being. I remember when my father passed away 15 years ago. You never forget these moments. I remember when we came back from the funeral to our parents' home, to where they lived. My mother was alive, still alive, may she be well. I remember, who came immediately when we came back from the funeral? You know who was there? a bunch of young men and women who had lost a parent. And they were just there. They didn't say a word. There was so much strength in their presence because it was like without saying anything, you just looked at each other. You knew, I have been here. I've been in this fire. And I just wanted to be here. There's tremendous power in that synergy. Now, can you explain it? Does it solve the issue? Do you feel less pain and less loss? No. But you feel, number one, that someone cares. And you feel validated. Because that's something very important. You're validated. There's nothing wrong with you. Just like we smile, tears are very natural. As a matter of fact, someone who cannot cry. Someone who cannot cry is actually like think of a kettle of boiling water, and there's no spout. There's no release. Tears are a release. They're a release of the grief. Grief is energy. The grief of the soul. Crying out because of something that is overwhelming. Another thing the Kabbalists, the mystics say, that tears are actually like a bath, a spa. They bathe your soul. Warm, salty tears. They are in a way a cleansing agent. But here it's not cleansing in the physical sense, it's cleansing in the psychic sense. Cleansing us from our grief, from the sense of loss, from that type of almost finality that comes with a death. Now, we're not just talking about death here, but remember, every form of pain and suffering is a mini death. Death of a relationship, death of a promise, a broken promise, and so on. So the first thing is allow yourself, what do they say, the expression, the only way out is through. Allow yourself to cry. Allow yourself to feel. It's a validation of your emotions. Someone that refuses or is someone imposes upon you not to be able to express your feelings, just like it's tragic if someone stops you from smiling and laughing and celebrating for a good occasion, it's equally tragic if someone stops you from crying. And that goes a long way. That's why step number one in anything of this is first just being part of reality. We all dissolve in the higher truth of an experience that we may never understand because it defies the mind. The big question, why bad things happen to good people? Why should we suffer altogether? Why human suffering? If you believe in God, why would a good God allow someone to suffer? So those questions, I will say to you, you may never find a complete answer. Because if you were God, maybe you would know. And maybe God is also beyond logic and rationale. As he told Job, the great classic sufferer, Job, the book of Job, when Job asks, why is there human suffering? And God says, were you there when I created heaven and earth, when I created it all, that you asked me that question? In other words, were you there? Are you in the engineering room? You ask me why there is death. Do you ask me why there's life? You ask me why there's suffering. Do you ask me why there's joy? You ask me why there's the end. People passing away, dying, and you ask me why there's birth. In other words, it's all intertwined. It's a complex reality life that has two sides to it. One side that is extremely joyous and so on, and the other side that is the opposite. But if you cut out one, you maybe have to cut out the other as well. So we don't know the mysteries, and we don't ask that question. When things are going well, very few people say, why are things going well? I don't understand it. Why? Because we expect it. There's a certain sense of entitlement. I'm not saying we shouldn't. We all be blessed in that way. But when things don't go right, we suddenly say, what's wrong? Why? Why is this happening? Because we're being impacted. And I'm not criticizing that question. But we have to also be wise enough to understand there's something more. Does anyone know why COVID suddenly struck? Why some people died and some didn't? Why some are still suffering and some didn't? We may never have answers to those questions. We're not looking for answers. We're looking for a way to navigate and go through it and become stronger people in the process. So step one, again, is the acknowledgement of just the mere acknowledgement, validation of your own feelings, the feelings of another. And realizing, no, we're not looking for rational and philosophical explanations. Step two, each of us in our own way, is about trying to see how we grow from it. I'll share with you something. I remember in South Africa, in Johannesburg, I gave a talk. They specifically wanted me to talk about this thing, people who have suffered. And the audience were only, maybe there were other people, but the primary audience were people who had lost children or close ones in very tragic circumstances. And I shared what I just shared. Before I move on, I want to just share what one woman in the audience came over to me afterwards and said, I disagree with you. I did find an answer. You said there was no answer, it's silence. I did find an answer. Now, obviously, I was not going to disagree. That's her experience. And I said, I'm honored to hear that. Please share. She says, yes, for years I did not have an answer. It was silence. But I ultimately found redemption. I found not the reason why it happened, but I ultimately understood that what happened ultimately was for a better cause. I still miss my child, but I realized that some certain growth came from it that could never have happened without it. Now, I would never tell her that because it's not my place. It's not our place to say that. Again, it's to hold a person's hand, to be there for them. But that is exactly what happens. Interestingly, when the catharsis takes place correctly, when you cry when you should be crying, then you'll build when you should be building. And you'll laugh when you should be laughing. And dance when you should be dancing. If you don't cry properly, you will not be able to build. In the words of the Psalm, King David's Psalm, he says, that those that sow in tears reap with joy. Why is that the case? Because if you don't deal with the emotions in the right way, if you don't navigate properly, if you're not going to travel properly when there's a moment when you need to be silent and humbled and quiet, you will not be able to then celebrate when you need to celebrate properly. Because it's not a true reaction. You're fabricating stuff. This is one of the reasons at a chuppah, at a marriage ceremony, why is there the breaking of the glass at the end of the ceremony? It's the high point of their lives. Why are they breaking a glass? Because it's a recognition that even at the highest point of your life, a new couple getting married, unbelievable joy, maybe the most joyous moment for people, to be humble and remember there are some people who are still broken. There are some people who are still lost something. Don't just become arrogant and self-contained in your own joy. And then the day comes when you may not be completely 100% joy, because you remembered those that were broken. When you were at your high point, you will be remembered. And there also won't be suffering and pain that's complete. So humility actually frees us from the trap of being completely consumed. People who say, and I've seen people who say to me, I'm completely destroyed. I can't do a thing. And they go for months like that, and sometimes years. I'm not suggesting it's arrogance, but it's like the kettle. There's no release. Healing means being able to cry, being able to acknowledge, and so on. And then what happens is something opens up. Something opens up. As time passes, you come to realize deeper truths. It's just like maturity in general. Can you explain, if you're a 25-year-old, can you explain to a 15-year-old what it means to be 25? Can a 40-year-old explain to a 25-year-old what it means to be 40? I don't mean the age. I mean the maturity, the experiences. There's just some things that only come with experience. And the same is true with pain and suffering. So at the end of the day, when you ask the question, why does good God allow bad things to happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? The answer is multifold. Number one, we don't have an answer to that question. It's a perfectly fine response not to have an answer, and to accept and embrace the mystery of life. Number two, once you do that, you do come to find deeper truths. And then you can say to yourself, did something really bad happen? Was it bad? Yes, it was bad on one level. But is there any deeper good in it? Perhaps. I will say more than perhaps. There was always deeper good in it. Because there's no such thing as bad as an end in itself. But you can only say that after you've gone through stage one. If someone comes and says that at the beginning, the wrong time, and therefore the wrong place, and it will not have the proper effect. But step two is ultimately discovering that every setback and every moment of darkness and every trauma and loss, though we would prefer to turn the clock back, and it should never have happened, but after the fact, if you allow yourself to heal, Healing means you discover the sparks and the goodness even in that. That's not the goodness in the person who perpetrated. The perpetrator is a criminal, and they deserve whatever God will does between them and God. But you have not become defined by suffering. You've not become defined by pain. It happened to you. So there's a time where it's so overwhelming when we need to acknowledge that. But then there comes a time where you can separate. Not say it didn't happen to me. It happened, but it happened to me. It is not me. It does not define me. I have suffered. Someone abused me, but I'm not an abuse product. I'm not a product of abuse. I'm a human being with a divine soul, with a beautiful soul, with a sacred dignity that never can be defiled, and it was robbed from me, my awareness of it. And now I've rediscovered my dignity. I've rediscovered. Didn't disappear. It wasn't annihilated. It seemed annihilated, and I've rediscovered it. And now I can reclaim my life. I am not going to be continuing to be haunted by the nightmares of the pains and suffering that happened to me. But that does not happen overnight. That happens after you come, break the silence, you open up. These are the steps. You open up to somebody, you cry, you do what it takes to begin, like any infection. If it's sealed, it festers and it can grow. You have to let fresh air in, a new friend, a new experience. And slowly, slowly the healing begins. The early stages of healing are quite painful. The later stages of healing begin to discover. So the first stages are actually dealing with the trauma or dealing with the pain, as I said, expressing or some way moving through it. Then there comes the point where you begin to discover, I've become a different person because of it, and a better person, more sensitive. I can identify with others that went through this. And many people actually become great healers, great friends, because they can empathize in ways that only someone that went through the fire can empathize. Now, again, we prefer it didn't happen. But once it did, you discover things, and such greatness can emerge. The most refined people I know personally are the ones that went through a real fire. And I'm not saying everyone that went through fire is able to achieve that. Sometimes we give up. We don't see it through. But if you allow yourself not to be completely consumed, you allow yourself to realize in humility that this is an experience that's leading you somewhere, that is a key element. That is why you find in the 12-step programs and in many other healing processes, they talk about surrendering to a higher power. Why is that? It's not a surrender in weakness. It's recognizing that it's not all about me, because if it's all about you, just as you may be completely consumed with your joy, you can be completely consumed with your pain. And then how do you get out of that trap? But if it's not all about you, there is some bigger plan, there's some bigger picture, like a narrative, a story. It's only one chapter in your book is the pain and suffering chapter. But then there's another chapter where it leads you to. Our job is to make sure we continue to travel. So I would say, the final analysis, that pain and suffering, just as it is with love and joy, is part of the journey of life. Journey, the emphasis on journey. As you see it as a journey, if you get to a place that's dark, foreboding, chilling, fearful, the key is to find the resources to make sure those that care for you, there's the empathy, but to move through it. You move through it. As you move through it, what happens is you realize it's one chapter that's leading to the next chapter and the next chapter. And those chapters can be very beautiful if you allow it to be. What happens is that we get trapped and we stay in this chapter. It's like staying in the same scene, gets frozen, the dark scene. It gets frozen in our memories. It haunts us in our nightmares. The demons are present. Therefore, we need to bring in the angels, which means people in our lives that bring beauty out of us, that believe in us, getting involved in projects that are very positive oriented. Even projects that may actually be part of helping others in the same situation you were in. These are forces that actually redeem and discover the deeper light, even in the darkest moments. So, God should bless each of us never to have to have pain or suffering at all. But when we do, keep these words in mind. It is part of life's experiences. And you have to go through it, let it seep through you with the right empathy. with the right care, the validation that yes, you can cry. You're allowed to be upset. You're allowed to be angry even. But keep moving. Never stop. Keep moving. Don't let yourself get trapped in isolation, in loneliness. Those are the worst forces for darkness, because then they feed into the demoralization. I'm all alone. Nobody cares about me. Nobody knows. Nobody can ever understand my pain. You must keep moving. Even if you have to force yourself at times, tell a good friend, even if you hear me say, I don't want to come to the party, come and make sure I'm there. Obviously with the right discretion, knowing when not to assault somebody's psyche. But keep moving. Keep trucking, as they say. As you keep moving, what happens is, like with day and night, you keep moving, you get stuck in the night, you're stuck in the night. The night will turn to day, the dawn will break, and a new day will begin. And don't be surprised, there'll also be a new night. But the night continues, and the night leads to another day. May that day and dawn be great and beautiful. This time that we're living in right now, we need this message more than ever. These are challenging times. They may have ups and downs, so much chaos going on. Many things are man-made, unfortunately. But don't allow others to define your life. Not those that cause pain, and even those that cause joy. You define your destiny. Your soul is on a journey toward a beautiful, grand, and majestic future. God bless you all. May we only talk about these beautiful things. May all the darkness bring the greatest and deepest light. We're here every Sunday. Meaningful Live on many different platforms. Please share, like, and this is all recorded as well. So though it's live right now, you can access it afterwards. Share it with your friends. Please, I'd love to hear your comments, feedback, even critique, because it's all part of the beautiful journey that we're on together. Thank you again. Be well.